stage where you're literally paying nothing, which cannot be right in some respects. And especially, if you're self-employed and you're putting a business through it as well. I got a rebate this year, which they've just taken off me in one fell swoop. But the problem has been the time it's taking to get the double taxation sorted at the Isle of Man's end, and for me not to pay Manx tax anymore. And there's a form but unfortunately, HMRC haven't told the Isle of Man that this is all electronic now. You do it on an electronic form. So I had a big computer says no conversation with them last week, trying to get them to accept this electronic version of the rubber stamp thing which they want. So I've just given them another prod with regard to it, because the thing is, all it's doing is creating admin. I'm going to be paying tax here. I'm going to be reclaiming tax in the Isle of Man. So all it's doing is keeping another tranche of the Manx civil service in employment, which might be what they want. I don't know.
I'm just hitting the live button now. Michael, you okay?
Okay, hang on a sec. Sorry, I was going to try and sort out something, but it's not going to work. So. Okay. Do I look right? Derek reports that some sort of noise that he kept on being able to hear from me.
It's gone now. Well, it's better than it is. But like I say, it just sounds like your Malibu beach hut, and there's just the sound of the shore in the background there, which isn't a bad look. Let's face it.
The Malibu beach hut. That is a nice thought, isn't it? But we're thousands of miles away from there. We're on the Isle of Man. It's MannTalk with Michael Josem, Derek
Hello,
Flint,
Jed. Good to be here with you.
And you, Michael. And tell me, we'll talk a bit about Twitter in a bit. I've seen your account has been active. I want to know more about this Rachel Glover thing, the latest tranche. Some interesting, comment from her about the testing process and charges and so forth. I think you picked up on that, did you?
Yep.
And Derek, live from deepest Lancashire.
Oh, aye. Lancashire Day today as well. It is actually what is dubbed Lancashire Day. So a proud day for us now naturalised Lancastrians again. Yeah. So,
what is it? Wet and miserable over there. Is
it? Isn't it always? No, I've been out on the bike this morning. It's dry. It's cold. The nice thing is it's very flat. So I managed to get just over 25 miles in on the bike this morning, which was good, right down the coast and back. No, everything's okay in general terms. We get the house keys in about a week to 10 days. You've just seen Mrs. F there. She was just getting some more sewing stuff and for fixed curtains. But everything's ticking on, mate. Just it's like any move. I mean, it's bad enough moving from Ramsey to Castletown, but when you're putting different jurisdictions into it, it's just all the cloying admin. I mean, at the moment, I'm just trying to decouple myself from paying Isle of Man tax, and it's slightly more difficult than it needs to be, shall we say. But that's just the thing. I think HMRC have introduced a new electronic way of doing it, and just haven't bothered to tell all the jurisdictions. So every day's a school day, but it'll be just nice just to get one set of paperwork to fill in.
So just tell me, the bike ride, how did it compare? Were you faced with dozens of cycleways, or was it a struggle along the dual carriageway?
Well, you know what? It's quite interesting because I'm staying at my mother's in a place called Thornton Cleveland's at the moment. So I literally turn left out the door, cycle on a fairly major road up to Fleetwood, but because it's wide, there's plenty of passing room. It's a 40-mile-an-hour limit, so you pretty much know where with the majority of traffic. Then you get to Fleetwood, and it is literally a footpath/stroke cycleway ride all the way to Lytham St Anne's if you want to go that far. I did that the other day, but I just cancelled out at North Pier and turned back round. So you're off the main road. which is amazing. And certainly when we talk about this active travel thing, which the Isle of Man has been playing with for some time, this is how you do it. You do take over fairly broad tracts of land and put the infrastructure in there. So even when it's busy, with you can imagine what the traffic density over here is. You've got room to cycle safely. So no, I've enjoyed it. It's been good, and it is a damn sight flatter as well, which is always going to get my vote.
Well, I really want to keep an eye on that because safety is important. But I'll just fill you in with my safety message for today. Michael, you like your food, don't you? I know you do.
Sure.
I know you do.
You're not just trying to call me fat there, are you?
No, I know you do. I know you appreciate it.
I think that's what he was saying.
Yeah. I think I could forgive you, Jed.
I just dipped into the bread bin earlier on, and there was a stale taco. Okay. It'd been kicking around for a few days, so I thought, I'll put it in the toaster. Is that a good move? Just to give it some life again?
I don't think it's your best move.
So I don't know how interested you are in the science behind the taste of stale bread, but essentially what happens over time is that the bread crystallizes, and you can essentially reverse that crystallization by heating it up a bit. The downside, of course, to keeping your bread warm is it's more likely to go moldy. And so if you want a little sneaky trick, you can keep your bread cool, frozen, or just chilled in the freezer, in the fridge. And then when you're ready to eat it, then you can heat it up to break down that crystalline structure, and it should taste almost as fresh as new.
No, unfortunately, the taco must be a different composition, and it disintegrated and went on fire. So I've just put a picture of the toaster that's now wrecked and destroyed, and it's one to watch because a proper fire started in the kitchen. I put it in for about 30 seconds, and the whole, because it must have been the oil as kind of diffused or whatever from the taco, and it set the toaster on fire. So fortunately I was there making a cup of tea, but this is how accidents happen. So the little tip for everyone out there: do not try
I've seen people sectioned for less than that, Jed. You really are worrying me now, to be honest with you.
Well, I thought it was a fair call. A taco would have just, I would have breathed some life into it, but no, it's off to the local retailer to get a new toaster. Anyway, moving on, Michael. So there was some Twitter action with Dr. Rachel. Can you just talk us through what your side of it was, what your perception is?
So there's a whole lot of different stories here. I'm not sure exactly which one you're referring to, so you're going to need a little bit more specific there,
I'll get it up on the screen for the viewers. So it's the one where it's about the DHSC were going to sell private testing kits at the using the Goodwill at cost reagents my company supplies to them for the good of the IOM population during the pandemic. Is that right? There's some little story there, and I think Derek contributed to that as well, and a few others. I like the Ricky Skillicorn one. This is the equivalent of picking up free stuff at the tip and flogging it on Facebook. Shocking, but sadly unsurprising.
Sure. So I think what Dr. Glover is saying there is that currently her business provides various supplies for testing to the Isle of Man government at cost, and that I think that Dr. Glover is saying there that is part of her, I don't know what the right phrase here, but her ethical and social obligations, her business's contribution to the community in an unusual situation, and now it appears that the government is talking about now providing testing on demand at will to people who are travelling off the island, so that they can get some sort of certified test, and in doing so, it looks to me like Dr. Glover agreed to provide, Dr. Glover's business rather, agreed to provide the testing services for people under one category of testing, and the government is now talking about introducing it under a different category of testing, which I think is surprising to Dr. Glover and probably surprising to a lot of people.
It's a story that just keeps on giving. We had Lettergate that I think has disappeared in the long grass. Derek, is that right? We've not really seen a great deal of that. That's all finished off, isn't it?
No, I mean, it's an interesting thing, this, in terms of the old credibility side of things. What I've been doing the last week or so is reflecting an awful lot on what happens on the Isle of Man in politics and what happens in the United Kingdom in politics. And you look at yesterday, the outpouring of anger with regard to the fact that about 56 million of the population are still staying in tier 3, which has made the whole last couple of weeks of lockdown seem completely futile. And in the Isle of Man, I think the frustration is that you can shout directly at a politician and it still doesn't make a difference. Okay, you can shout directly at a politician, but the chances of being heard are massively reduced because of the noise around it and the whole scale of things. So I think this is one of the really disappointing things with regard to where Manx politics is. We talk about a local service for local people and how that insularity should really help that interaction between the constituents and the politicians and Comin and government and so on. But I don't think it does. I don't think it makes any real great bit of difference, because there you've got David Ashford, blowing his credibility out of the water on a similar sort of way to Boris and all the promises that he'd made and let people down with. The whole thing doesn't compute, but I hope it doesn't go away, because notwithstanding that particular letter, there are some fundamental issues with FOI, with security of correspondence. I'm presuming that wasn't actually an anonymous letter. I think it was redacted rather than anonymous. So there are some real fundamental issues. If we're destroying best evidence at source, we've got some real problems, and I hope that the Manx government wakes up to that, because that's not a road that they want to go around.
I think there's some challenges ahead, and of course the government has only got another 10 months or so to run, and they're going to be defined on the COVID crisis. They're going to be defined on the management of the promenade. They're going to be defined on the sea terminal stage in Liverpool. But the defining factor of all is going to be the delivery of the vaccine next year. I'm convinced if they don't get that right, they're going to be up the creek. Michael?
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's very concerning, disappointing that the Isle of Man government has not published their listing of how they will be distributing the vaccine and to who they will be distributing it to. They have made some generic answers in response to public questions, but that simply doesn't rise to the standard of something so sensitive. For example, in the United Kingdom, there's an extensive publication by the JCVI, which is the what does it stand for? It's like the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisations, has published extensively on this issue. They've published using their scientific research. They've looked at how the disease is circulating in the British community, and they've used that to inform their ranking of the prioritisation. Whereas none of that scientific documentation has been published for the Isle of Man, and it's really incumbent upon the.
He's frozen. Are you still there, Jed?
I'm there. Yes, I'm there. Derek, do you want to pick up on that?
The vaccine thing and what you were saying before about the whole, the whole credibility
Manx
thing.
government.
Oh, he's gone again. Jed, Michael, we missed about 20 seconds of that oratory. You cut out.
I'm sorry that you missed out there, because it was that was the most impressive, thoughtful, and considerate thing that I'd say. But really, what I was saying there is that it's time for the government, the Manx government, to publish a scientific documentation about their vaccine plans. In the UK, the JCVI have published extensively. They've published the scientific research and linked and transparently disclosed all the scientific research underpinning their ranking. And some of the ranking there is that it includes a provisional listing of priority groups from the scientific research. It provides footnotes. It provides, analysis. And one of the key things that makes the UK different to the Isle of Man is that in the UK they have included in their scientific research the transmission dynamics, and so they've published that. Their decision is based upon the UK national COVID-19 surveillance reports, which is a summary of findings monitored through various COVID surveillance systems. And so that is a ranking and a prioritisation that is appropriate for the UK and based on UK science. Whereas obviously the transmission of coronavirus in the Isle of Man is very different to the transmission of the coronavirus in the UK because it is not circulating in our community, as far as we know. And so therefore, we cannot just copy the British ranking because the British ranking is for a British system. We need a Manx solution for the Manx situation. And so that's why it's really important that the Isle of Man government publishes its scientific research that underpins its ranking and prioritisation.
So, Derek, just put your operational head on. You've got 85,000 people that need vaccinating. What sort of factors are you thinking about?
A lot of it's going to be down to how many vaccines they've purchased and exactly what Michael says in terms of what the prioritisation is. I think it's unlikely that the health service can cope with it because what you've seen in the last week is that non-elective surgery has gone down the tubes again, which is pretty damn disappointing if you're waiting for a new knee or a new hip or something like that, because the waiting lists are very long as they already stand. You've also got this very clunky triage system that's in place for the GP surgeries now, although there was some sort of hope with regard to the vaccination programme that was brought out for flu. That seemed to work reasonably well. I think what they've got to look at is where they might be able to get extra resources from. And I know that the UK Fire and Rescue Service has been approached with regard to training up to stick needles in people as an option. So it's one of those things where I would hope that whoever's in charge of the operational delivery of all this is looking at where there might be spare capacity on the island and how that might best be utilised. But I think Michael's point is really good because the scientific base doesn't exist on the Isle of Man because of the fact that the place has been COVID-free since July. So I suppose what they might want to look at is the modelling for remote and isolated communities. What are they going to do on the Isle of Wight? I mean, the Isle of Wight's in Tier 1. Scilly Isles are in Tier 1. So it might be that those are the models which they can utilise to get things forward. But I think, again, it depends what they want to achieve out of it. Do they want to now catalyse the economy? Do they want to get people moving on and off the island again? Or is it still, Fortress Man that is the objective where people can't come in and out without very, very good reason? So we'll wait and see. Interesting times and challenges for anybody because, of course, it's the first time any jurisdiction's been faced with anything like this.
It's an interesting concept, isn't it? A fire brigade or a fire engine on the street corner, dishing out inoculations, vaccinations. I quite like that. I think it's got to go out into the communities rather than having one central hub, maybe at the NSC or something like that, where everyone's going to be, diverge onto. I think if they have it community based and employ, these emergency services that perhaps aren't quite as hard pressed as what they could be, then we could have a solution very, very quickly. So, Michael, can we just move on to another subject? It was another tweet that caught my eye, and it was about housing, and it was a graphic that you posted. I'll just put it up on the screen, and it was about the affordability of housing compared from the 1990s to the 2010s, and there's some quite stark figures there on how can average Joe or Josephine get on the ladder.
Yeah, you're right. There's ultimately there's a housing affordability crisis that we have here in the Isle of Man, and that this graph or this chart shows it very very starkly in that back in the 1990s, Manx earnings, the median Manx earnings were about £14,000, and these days in the 2010s, it's almost doubled, right? So earnings over time have almost doubled. In the house prices, however, the house prices have gone up by three and a bit times, 3 1/3 times or thereabouts. And so this reflects that buying your own home in the Isle of Man is increasingly an unobtainable fantasy for many people. They just don't think it's feasible. I was chatting to actually a real estate agent this morning, and he was saying that that there's a lot of demand for housing, and they're just simply my view here is that the answer to this is we need to provide supply to keep up with that demand. And demand over the last 20 years has increased for many different reasons. Chiefly amongst it, we have had more people now living on the Isle of Man than 20, 30 years ago. So that requires more housing. Secondly, we have people getting married later in life, which means people live alone for longer. Thirdly, we have people getting divorced sooner. Increased rates of divorce means that there's a reduction in household size, only slight so far, but I think this will continue to escalate in the future. And the result being that previously mum, dad, and 2 or 3 kids would live together in one house. Now, mum has a house for her and the kids, and dad has a house for her and him and the kids. And the result being increased demand. And fourth of all, more broadly, the fall in interest rates means that people are able to borrow more money than previously, and that also fuels demand. And so the simple answer is we've got a lot of demand for housing on the Isle of Man and not enough supply. And these things all include trade-offs. And that every time the government says, "Oh no, we need to protect the green space" or whatever, which is nice and beautiful, and we need to be respectful of that, but it comes as a trade-off. And this is a trade-off illustrated very starkly. That for a lot of young people, they will say, "Look, I can earn X many pounds here in the Isle of Man, or I can go across to England or Ireland or further afield," and that ratio is really important.
And cue Derek. Now, Derek, you had your property up for sale for a while, didn't you? And then suddenly, I think it's in the last 3-4 months, prices ramped up, didn't they?
Yeah, well, we didn't really see any benefit of that. We had reduced the price of the house once, and then we actually accepted a lower offer from the buyer. The thing is, it had been up for 15 months, and we suddenly had an influx of people that were interested in it. But sometimes you've just got to go with your instincts, and we were happy with the price that we achieved. But
who were they? Who were they, Derek? Who were these people? What type of people were interested?
This was a couple that were about to be married, had been living together, had a townhouse in Douglas. So it was quite a significant step up for them, similar to how we stepped up when we bought that house back in 2007. It was a similar sort of uplift in terms of mortgage and everything, I would imagine, from what they achieved for their property.
I'm sure it is. That Flint estate, the Flint villa, is a step up for anyone, I'm sure.
Well, it's very kind to say so. We were very proud of what we achieved with it. But the bottom line was that I was really impressed, because I thought, well, there's a couple with confidence in the island, confidence in their employment, willing to make that step and everything, and ballsy move. Speaking to one of our 2 estate agents, in fact, the one that actually didn't sell the property for us, they were saying that a lot of just what you pointed out there, Michael, divorce sales were energizing that boom which we saw on the back of lockdown, where people had just probably got fed up with each other after 12 weeks under the same roof, and decided that it was time for a change. I think the problem. I absolutely subscribe to everything you say, Michael, in terms of the need for more housing. I think where the Isle of Man is letting itself down abjectly is its creativity in doing that. I'm a huge fan, and under different circumstances I might have gone to live there, Poundbury, down on the south coast, which is part of the Duke of Cornwall's estate, which was designed with his vision. It's a beautiful development with neo-Georgian architecture, but designed for the 21st century. You can walk to everything. There's still room to park your cars, but the street scene is nice. The houses are energy efficient, and it's the sort of thing where the island could really do one of those. Hey, look at us! What we're doing in terms of energy efficiency. We're putting in biomass and air source heat pumps right now. We're over insulating. We're putting in mechanical heat recovery and all that sort of stuff as the spec for the big builders. Haven, Dandara, Hartford. If you want to build, we'll support you. But this is what you're building, and that's where I think for some time, quite a few of us are interested in that sort of whole architecture and home improvement side of things. I've been a little bit frustrated. I still can't understand why it is that if you now want to put an air source heat pump in at your house, you have to apply for planning permission. We all know that this is the way it's going to be. So at some stage, there will be in excess of 30,000 planning applications having to be made for something which we know we're going to have anyway. It doesn't make sense to me.
You're spot on. You're spot on there, Derek. That was one of the things I included in my manifesto is that people who want to upgrade their homes for environmental enhancements, whether it be the solar panel on the roof or whether it be your electric charging or whether it be your air source heat pump or a bike rack or whatever, those sort of developments and improvements and enhancements, once you have a standardized design that has been approved once, they should essentially be approved, automatically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, this is the way it's gone over here. Everything is there's a position where development is presumed, permission to develop is presumed. A lot of it's just done on building regs now, in terms of permitted development, and compared to the sort of stuff that you have to wait eons for permission to build in the Isle of Man, it just makes no sense. So it does need a shake-up. We know it needs a shake-up. It's needed a shake-up for a long time, but again, this jurisdiction, this administration, the last 5 years, just hasn't really seized the opportunity to actually do something forward. I think the only significant really piece of legislation that's come out in the last 5 years is the abortion improvements and no-fault divorce bills. Helps a niche of population, and that's great. But here's something that could actually, catalyze the whole economy again. On a different level, but I don't know. Well, there's obviously something going on that we don't understand at our level, but it's always been one of those fascinating things for such a small jurisdiction. We don't get that look behind the curtain to find out what is driving these rather archaic and odd decisions.
It's
a petty authoritarianism. It's not the authoritarianism of evil, but it is just these meddling municipal menaces who want to put their finger into everything. And it's sad, it's disappointing, and the people of the Isle of Man pay a hidden tax. They pay hidden fees, hidden costs as a result of it. And it's not necessarily, a stealth tax per se, but it is the tax on time. It is the tax on resources, the tax on effort that is extracted because you have to fill out all these stupid forms and you have to wait X many months. I'll chat listening to a conversation with Manx Solar Electrical on the radio this week, where they're talking about, hey, in the height of summer back in July, August, and so on, people were wanting to get solar panels installed on their roof, and we should be welcoming, we should be endorsing, we should be doing everything we can to allow people to do this. They didn't want any taxpayer revenue money to do it. They just wanted permission, and so what would happen is that people would submit their planning applications, and they have to wait 3 months. What possible reason is there to oppose someone putting solar panels on the top of their roof? It's nonsense. And we need to get out. We need to have a government that stops riding on people's back and starts walking beside them.
And you're paying for the privilege. I think it's full planning for you as well, I'd imagine. But I'd like to know what the data is. So out of, say, every 100 houses that are built, how many have been constructed for investment purposes? How many have been made available to those people who are trying to get on the ladder? Because my suspicion is that there's a circle going round here. There's the rental trap, and I'm hearing about people now who highly paid in Isle of Man government and positions of responsibility, and the multiple property owners. Is that right? Is that right? It doesn't sit well with me.
I think it's something that it goes back to those Nolan principles of life in public service, and it's that moral compass in terms of going back to what you're comfortable with. I mean, I'd heard some rumours that are similar to yourself, Jed. I think that a very high-ranking politician had bought a couple of investment properties, and you sort of think, well, okay, that's fine, but do you do it whilst you're in office, or should it actually be left until such a time as you've left office? It's really difficult. I mean, the problem is, I mean, it's bent over here. You've only got to look at MPs' expenses, scandals, and this, that, and the other. You sort of accept that when there's 700 of them in the house or whatever. When it's a small microcosm like the Isle of Man and the House of Keys, it doesn't need to be like that. And I think Michael's phrase there of walk alongside the public, not in front of them or behind them, is really, really important. That's how it should be. And I do hope genuinely that the Isle of Man does get to that stage at some point. It didn't whilst we were residents time after time. 22 years. What's that? That's four administrations. They just continued tripping over themselves, the same old thing. But what worries me is when I look at the money that goes into the UK in terms of taxation, local charges, this, that, and the other, and I look at the infrastructure failings over here, I worry about how sustainable, and I've always worried about how sustainable the Isle of Man model is. I don't understand where the money's coming from. It's like that famous note that they left the Tories, wasn't it? There's the Chancellor. There's no more money left. Have a good time. And it must be getting to that point now, because other than the internal economy propping up receipts, I'm not actually seeing where the big money is coming in. Again, another mystery.
Well, Michael, I'm sure you can think about the maths. We've got, say, 500 houses being built. I think that would be a fair assumption. But where are these people coming from?
Sure. So as we spoke about earlier, the increased demand is fundamentally, first of all, we have had a slight population increase over the last 30 years. Second of all, household sizes are slightly reducing. Not quite as much was revealed in the census data as I would have expected, but there seems to be ongoing pressure there for people to separate. And so that's causing, as I said before, what previously would have been, one house with 3 bedrooms, say, might have been enough for mum, dad, and the 2 kids. Now, as a result of separation, there are increasing number of households needing 2 houses, 2 3-bedroom houses. So mum and the kids in one house, and then dad and the kids in the other. And as the children swap back and forth, that's causing the increased demand.
That's an interesting formula, isn't it? So the Isle of Man, it's a small place. So say if you have 100 families who've unfortunately had to go through that process, so you've got a number of dwellings that are required. And could it be that just tips the balance because there's a lot of rent being paid, and these rentals are being enjoyed by investment companies and private people who've got a bit of cash to spare? Is that what it is, or is there some sort of new business emerging? Are we getting a lot of people coming into the island, a lot of new residents? We've certainly seen a lot of new English registered cars. That's been featured in the local tittle tattle. I just wish somebody knew.
So we know that there's an increased demand for housing, and when you speak there about landlords and so on, I would be very wary of criticising people who are investing in building houses, because clearly there's a need for housing, right? And so instead, I would be criticising the people who are not building houses, and so that is the people who are making it harder to build houses. So like it doesn't make sense to me to criticise people who have invested in housing for the lack of housing, because obviously they've invested their money. They've put their money where their mouth is, and they've, directly or indirectly contributed to the construction of a house. So I would be critical of people who are not constructing houses. And so that is the bureaucrats, the rules, the regulations that make it harder for young Manx families to have accessible housing.
But this is it. Is it accessible, or is the housing, say we go back to this 100 houses, how many are actually being bought and enjoyed by young people getting on the ladder? Or is it Mr. or Mrs. Big just having a rental income? And we don't know that. I'd love to know the answer.
Well, I can tell you that the whole the whole purpose that someone would invest in a house is so that someone can live in that. And whether it be the owner themselves or whether they rent it out to themselves, ultimately it's still a human being or family of humans who live in the house. And so, again, I would say you do not criticise the people who are investing in housing, because they are providing the housing. It doesn't make sense to be angry with the baker for the lack of bread, because the baker is baking the bread.
But it's the lack of control in the market. That's what we're suffering from. It's a completely free market. So people who are on. Are
you kidding me? What a ridiculous thing to say! It is not a completely free market.
But they are on
the hurdles that you have to go to build a house here. It takes months and months to even get solar panels installed on your house. God help us if you want to do something bigger and to actually build more housing for people. But the idea that the housing market is a free market is ridiculous. We have a whole series of planning committees. We have a whole series of rules and regulations and so on. It is absurd to say that the free market is tightly controlled. It is tightly regulated. It is a tightly constricted supply, and that is why the people of the Isle of Man are suffering.
But we haven't got a mechanism so that young people can be assisted into buying houses. That's what I mean.
Yes. We do. We have the Isle of Man government's first home buyers grant, but ultimately these sort of schemes are only ever going to touch the sides. The only way to make housing more accessible is to build more houses. If you want to reduce the price of bread, the best way to do that is to bake more bread. The best way to reduce the price of cars is to make more cars. The best way to reduce the price of housing and make it more accessible is to build more houses. This is not complicated. It doesn't require these, little bureaucrats with their control and expertise. In the same way that there is no government official who decides how much bread is made each day in the Isle of Man.
Derek.
It's an interesting one. It's a very interesting one. I think one of the things I picked up on is the starting point. You can pick up a 2-bedroom new home here for around about £135,000. I would imagine you're probably looking at 170, 180, 190,000 for the same property on the Isle of Man. Now, notwithstanding the fact that the Manx Treasury currently lets you keep more money in your pocket with regard to your taxation, and interest rates are low, there is that affordability side of things. It's still a big threshold for somebody who is starting out maybe in their 20s to actually reach. So I think Michael's got a good point, but what has also got to happen is the fact that there has to be some conversation going on about those starter property price values, but it's sort of pulled away by the rest of the market now. And the last 6 months won't have helped things at all, because everybody now thinks the house and will have achieved those prices. Some people haven't, but everybody's threshold is up here now. I've noticed it when I've just sort of been looking at Manx property and just keeping an eye on the market there. It is that the threshold, the starting post.
Oh, we're just losing you a bit, Derek. I for this show I put a timer on that we'd just do half an hour, so we're just coming to an end. But I think a little challenge, and especially to you, Michael, for the next one, let's just scan the housing market. We'll put some screenshots up on the screen, and we'll have a look at what is available to the average Joe or Josephine. Okay, there's a challenge. Then we can talk about that. Okay.
Yeah, cool.
We'll
Look
do
forward
that.
to it.
Okay.
And you know what? And you know what? Also, we should do. We should compare that with some of the other cities in the world, some other places. I think that would be
Why?
I'll do it for the File Coast.
Lovely. Okay, we'll come to an end now. We're not going to rattle on. We'll join up again next week. That's been wonderful. Have a great weekend, guys. So we'll see you.
See you, fellas. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jed.
Bye.